I'm good. Well, Doug, thanks for joining me today. I'm so grateful. I can't believe you said yes when I reached out. So thanks for joining me on the show today.
Well, thanks for having me, Jeff. I look forward to getting to know you better too.
Well, as always, I really hope that this will resonate with you. But I hope that today's conversation feels more like maybe a shared walk in the woods between some now friends versus an interview. So that's
Well,
my goal.
speaking of walking, I discovered from listening to a recent episode that you have walked the Camino de Santiago. Maybe I'm getting way ahead of myself, but I knew immediately that we had something important in common.
We have a lot in common, but actually, from that most recent episode, that is one of my goals. And when I read your book, I thought, oh wow, we're already connected because not only did you talk about the Camino, and that's been something that I've been really interested in for a long time, and haven't made the time in my busy schedule to actually commit to it. But also, you referenced in your most recent book, The Traveler's Path, some of these people that have just been real inspirations to me. You mentioned Thomas Merton. You know,
Well,
he's right down the road from he was right down the road from us here in Louisville, Kentucky at the Abbey of the Gethsemane.
oh, that, yeah, okay, yes.
Yeah, it's about 45 minutes from our home here in Louisville. And you mentioned Joseph Campbell, and yeah, I knew we would connect right off the bat. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation. The funny thing about Merton, and not that there's anything humorous about his life, but he never ventured very far from that monastery. He lived most of his life right there, and yet, uh, I mean, he ventured pretty far in his thinking. Right?
Oh yeah, no, he definitely did. And what's crazy is I was introduced to Thomas Merton on my very first episode. I had my aunt Kathy on to join me, and she said she had a kind of a love affair with Thomas Merton. She just really was intrigued by him, and so I started digging in. I read his Seven Story Mountain, and one thing that was crazy to me is I've lived in Louisville, Kentucky now for over 30 years. And we walk around with our heads down all the time. We're not paying attention. And we have one of those big historical markers right on 4th and Muhammad Ali Boulevard in downtown that says this is the marker where Thomas Merton had his epiphany about interconnectedness. And I passed it along for years and didn't even know that it existed.
What Thomas Merton gave to me was language to describe what I've experienced. The quote, I'm not going to get it right, so this is a paraphrase, but he says at one point, you have an inner journey and an outer journey. You can have one without the other. It is best to have both. And that deeply resonated with me, and so I used it in the book.
That's great. One thing I think was fascinating about Thomas Merton is before he chose a life at the Abbey, a monastic life, he traveled a lot. You read his book, Seven Story Mountain. In his youth, he traveled all over Europe as a kid, and then I think he kept himself pretty much isolated at Gethsemane here in Bardstown, Kentucky. But then in your book, I think you quoted that, but you also mentioned that he took a trip out to Asia, right?
Yes.
And that's where actually didn't he pass when he was there?
Untimely, yes, but it was, and it's too bad because it was a life changing time in his life. He met religious leaders from other traditions and found that they had much more in common than they had differences.
Yeah, that's his epiphany of interconnectedness. And I think that was one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast and the story of us is to have deep, meaningful conversations with people from a wide spectrum of humanity. I believe that we obviously share much more in common than what everyone tries to make us believe that we do. And I think the more we tell stories and we talk about our uniqueness in the world and how that, is part of the fabric of humanity, the better we understand how really interconnected we all are. So, do you mind sharing with us first to get us kind of started off to tell us your story?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I wrote it out at one point so I could understand it better. I was born in Western Michigan, which is where I've retired to, interestingly enough. Uh, so that's my Joseph Campbell story. I ventured out and had crises and learned some stuff, and then I returned home, not exactly a hero, but having discovered myself in the process. I left Michigan at age 21 to go to graduate school and never really looked back. I lived in a variety of places around the U.S. I've lived a couple of times in Europe and have had rich experiences along the way. I'm a Presbyterian pastor. I mean, uh, that's what motivated these moves.
Do you remember looking back what led you to the seminary and the life of ministry originally?
Yeah, in my senior year of college, I worked at a publishing company. It happened to be a Christian publishing company, and I noticed that all the editors had theological degrees, and I thought, okay, that's apparently the path into the world of publishing. And I went to Princeton Seminary in New Jersey, and what I didn't realize is that you have to work in a church in order to graduate. Somehow, I mean, I had nothing against the church, but that was not my motivation for going. And about 2/3 of the way through the process, I realized they weren't going to change the rules for me. And so I worked at a church in Iowa City, Iowa, university town, and had a life-changing experience. At some point, I thought, I was born for this. So I gave up my dream of, a life of publishing, and at that point, pursued pastorate.
And it's taken you all over the world. You've had some amazing experiences.
I think so too. The longest stretch of my life was spent in suburban Chicago. We raised our daughters there, but we've lived in South Florida, and then from there we went to Zurich, Switzerland, for a number of years. I was I was closing in on 60 years old, and I was required to learn a new language, which is not easy to do. Uh, I mean, before you're 10 years old, that would be the preferred time. But anyway, I was required to learn German, and then I went back to Europe in retirement for a brief stint, and I lived in and worked in The Hague.
Amazing experiences, and I think that ultimately the lesson there is that, when those opportunities came up and rose for you, you said yes. A lot of people say no. You took it and you ran with it.
So I in the writing of my travel book, I think I came to a conclusion about why that's true. My parents gave me the gift of curiosity. I was not aware, I was not really aware of it at the time, and certainly not appreciative. I never said thank you, but they raised me to be very curious about the world. And as you read in the book, we went on 3-week road trips every summer all over North America. And I think what that did was to spark interest in other people and other ways of doing things. That's been that's set the pattern for my life.
Now, and I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to ask you, one thing that I have learned reading a couple of your books is that how influential in very modest ways your dad was. You talk about your dad being a wonderful watercolor painter and artist. That's not what he did for a living. I think he worked in an advertising agency, but
Yes, yeah,
you
yeah.
know these experiences. And I also travel with my family, and I try to make it a worthy adventure in our own unique way.
Good.
My hashtag or my name on Instagram is never check bags. That's my big mantra. But I tried to do this as well, and I find myself doing something similar to what your dad did. Some of my favorite things about traveling around the world is just getting the camera out and taking pictures. And sometimes, there's a lot of pictures without the family, and they're not these, I don't know, look at me images that we're so used to seeing these days. It's a big contrast between the way that your dad approached his photography when you guys were taking these road trips. What kind of spirituality do you think that you learned from your father?
Yeah, he was always looking for beauty, so we never took a family portrait standing next to the Grand Canyon. That was not the reason for being there or for having a camera. he was looking for a beautiful angle, a way of looking at the world, and then often he would come home and paint it, having taken a photo of it. So again, unconsciously, I think I adopted the same way of looking at the world. At some point, he got me a camera as well, and I imitated him in my photography. So yeah, it's the gift of curiosity and the awareness of beauty and art in the world. Hmm.
I think it's one of the things that I took away, and again, I keep referencing your book, The Traveler's Path, because I read it most recently, but also it resonates with me so much. Part of my story is that I always had this longing to be somewhere else. I think Mark Twain said, "Just go, 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 keep moving," and I had this urge to continue to move my whole life, and I was able to scratch that itch when I was in college. I had an Austrian economics professor that tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, Jeff, I run a exchange program at the Economics University in Vienna. I think you'd be a great fit. Would you like to do it?" And I looked at him and said, "Absolutely." I said yes. And that was a time in my life that I think I've been chasing my whole life. The excitement of, being that age, freedom, buying that first Euro pass, buying the book about Europe and exploring the world. And I remember very vividly doing this on my own, meeting lots of wonderful people along the way. And just that feeling, once I got into having children, starting a career, I've been chasing that feeling forever. So as soon as my kids got old enough, I made a commitment, my wife and I together, that we were going to start showing them the world. And it's been remarkable. But I keep talking about this book, The Traveler's Path, because it resonated with me so much. All of the adventures that you had are just, for the average person who doesn't move around too much, um, man, it feels like exciting stuff.
I have the same experience or a similar experience to yours. Pursuing career and raising children did not allow for much travel. But at a certain point, I mean, I can pinpoint the day and the hour. A member of my church took me out to lunch, and he said, "It's time to take a trip." And it had never crossed my mind, but he had in mind that I would lead a group of people to the Middle East, to Israel, and then later there would be stops in Jordan and Egypt and so on. But so so this wonderful man rekindled in me this desire to explore.
Yeah, and you've done a lot of it. I mean, gosh, and a lot of different travel. And what I like is that you gave me some words as it related to what you're trying to get out of travel. Not all is just leisurely vacations. You've said that travel can be spiritually formative when it's done with intention, and there's a lot of different types of travel, and you've done a lot of those. Study tours, pilgrimages, mission trips, leisure travel I in your mind, how are those can you separate those and tell us a little bit more about how each one of those is a little different or what is the uniqueness of each one? Particularly as it relates maybe to inner growth?
Yeah, but I want to preface this by saying I too feel a need to go to a beach and sit in the sunshine and read a book. I get why that's important, and I've done my share of that. But then there's another kind of travel that has become very important to me. And at the beginning, I think I did it mainly with groups. And that was because that was the way to afford it. If if I led a study tour or a pilgrimage, then my way was paid. And so for a number of years, that's the way I did it. And then it's only been in recent years where I've decided to go alone, and that's led to walking the Camino a couple of times and things like that. But uh, by leading my first pilgrimage, I got a glimpse of what this could mean and the life changing part of it. Can I tell you a brief story about that?
I would love you to tell me a brief story about that.
The first time to Israel, I discovered that I had a moderate interest in seeing all the sites that everybody's heard about. But what was life changing was meeting a particular person, a Palestinian priest who later became an archbishop in northern Israel. But when I heard him speak, and when my group heard him speak, we heard a story that we had never heard before. And I now know that there are many stories in the Middle East, not just the one that we hear most often. And this man became a dear friend. I came to see his history and his geography through a different uh, lens, maybe. I, and then I began to repeat that throughout my travels. I would meet people like that who caused me to think in different ways.
And I think that's a big part of what I've tried to instill in travel in my family is part of it is immersing yourself in the local culture and being willing to, do things like learn a little bit of the language, but also make a connection with live human beings, right? And I think that that's something you can take with you and bring back to your community and help kind of spread that message.
When I lived in Zurich, Switzerland, I would see tour buses of usually American tourists go by, and I wanted to shout after them to get off the bus, talk to somebody, ask about their lives, find out what it's like to live in this part of the world. Now, I need to be fair. There are some people who can only travel that way. I think my parents, as curious as they were, always had a tour guide and a printed itinerary. Uh, they were very adventurous, and yet I don't think they got off the bus very much to interact with the local population.
Sure, I took a trip as I was younger. I had that trip to Europe, and it was just very meaningful for me. And I was very fortunate and blessed that my stepfather, my mom, and my sister wanted to do something really similar the year I graduated. So we all went over together, and it was a very different experience. I remember writing in my journal about how, it was frustrating to me to be in all these wonderful places. And it was all about kind of looking at the architecture or the 15-minute glimpse of the Mona Lisa or, moving on. And I thought, no, wait, there's so much more here. So much more.
And but once again, to be fair, I didn't get that right away. I mean, the curiosity grows over time. So I think on some of my initial trips, I was eager to have my photograph taken in front of the Eiffel Tower, and so I could show other people. But the more I traveled, then the more curious I became, and the more I wanted to ask people, meet people. So I just want to make sure that people understand that this doesn't happen. It probably doesn't happen immediately for very many people. It's something you grow into.
Yeah. Well, I think that's just like anything else. I think you have to have your first couple of experiences and, maybe it's a rite of passage to take those photographs, eat those, eat those certain things you're supposed to eat everywhere. But on that second or third journey, that's when you can really dig in, right?
Yes, yeah, yeah, I like that.
Yeah. I think an undertone and something that really captured me was there's this undertone of maybe even on some of these types of trips, there's a little bit of guilt that sets in. And I've felt that too. The type of guilt that I've felt is that I've gone to some of these places and we read about, over tourism and how
Yeah,
difficult that can be on some of these places. And while you want to love to go to a place like Barcelona or Rio de Janeiro or some of these places, Venice, um, it's very tough on their communities, and I felt that kinda undercurrent of a little bit of guilt when you see the masses of humanity, like, just taking over like a swarm of locusts, some of these local cultures, and I left with a little bit of guilt there, but you talk about it as it relates to mission-driven travel and some of the missionary work that you've done, and can you tell us a little bit about how you are challenging people to rethink that just a little bit?
yeah, I agree with you. First of all, that much travel today is deeply problematic. It ruins the places we visit, and it's probably bad for the earth, our air travel, and so on. So yes, a great deal of travel can be problematic. And then in terms of mission trips, there's often a white savior complex. The money that we spend to get places could probably be better used by the people who are already there. We could make investments from this if we really wanted to. So yes, I get that much travel today is deeply problematic, and I wrestle with that. Um, what makes me feel okay about some of the mission trips I took is again the relationships that we formed with people in these other countries. I mean, leave aside the work that we did, it was making the connections, understanding their life in a different place. And in many cases, these relationships have continued for years after that first visit. And that's what I take away from these experiences. Oh, and also, seeing life again from a different perspective, from a different culture.
You mentioned a couple of the different mission trips that you've done from, those youth trips where, you stay within the United States and you go to a maybe a less fortunate community, you spend a little time there. And then, you mentioned, well, on the back end, we hit the roller coaster rides at the amusement park. And it's kind of one of those things, or, just the maybe rethinking that mission trip that on the tail end of it you tack on a cruise or a trip to a famous destination there, and you kind of want to scratch your head a little bit and say, is this what it's about, right?
Right.
Or
I'll give you another example. I've spent a couple of summers in Peru, and the first time we went, we thought we're here, we have to see Machu Picchu, and so we gave ourselves the gift of hiking to the top of Machu Picchu. Well, I, I have mixed feelings about that. I'm so glad that I was there. I'm so glad I saw it, but I'm not sure that was what was really necessary. And again, what I remember about those trips were the people we met and the understanding the local culture. Uh, it, we always seem to go over the Independence Day in Peru, and I forget exactly when that is now. And I remember watching an Independence Day parade and standing next to a Peruvian person who spoke English, and because my Spanish is not very good, but I said, "Oh, people are very patriotic here." And her response was, they love their country, they do not love their government.
okay,
I thought that was wonderful. And so there's my takeaway. Yeah, Machu Picchu was wonderful, but I got an insight from the people in Peru about what their love of country really means.
well, let's talk about that a little bit more because you've been you've lived and you've ministered in both the United States and over in Europe. You mentioned Netherlands and over in Switzerland. You've even learned the languages in your 60s to try to deepen your ability to encounter these cultures and these people. Do you feel like that is helpful and teaches us something about empathy?
Yeah, I'm having a hard time convincing people that this is true. I mean, I believe it deeply, but I've discovered in talking about the book and giving talks about it that I'm not able to convince many Americans that language learning is important, and I'm not sure what that's about. Americans are almost alone in the world. The Brits come close, but Americans are almost alone in the world in expecting other people to speak English to us.
Yeah.
And I have found that learning the language of another culture is a wonderful way of understanding that culture. Here's something that people have said. They say that when they go somewhere and speak English, the people they meet thank them for giving them the opportunity to practice English. And I've certainly heard
Right.
that too. But I think the people who say that are trying to make Americans feel comfortable with their limited language abilities, right?
I agree. I agree. And I think it's been part of, once we started this travel journey again, we've gone, not some of the cool places that you've been, but I've been able to take my family to places like Thailand and Morocco and
Oh,
Portugal and Brazil and Greece and Italy. And there's quite a few places. We're very blessed and we're grateful to be able to do that. And I find that you don't have to feel compelled to really learn the language. If you just try, you break down that barrier just a little bit. Even if you butcher it and you you you, you sound silly and you do if you're willing to sound a little silly, it disarms people because you're not trying to be cool, you're just trying to be respectful.
yeah. In, from my point of view or my experience, Americans tend to be, I'm not sure what the right word is, arrogant when they travel.
Yeah.
They think that Americans do things the right way, and that there is only one way to do things, and that's the American way. Uh, a little humility in travel goes a long way. Americans have one way of doing things, and I think we all understand it and appreciate that one way. But it helps to understand how other cultures have answered the same challenges, right? So the assumption that we know best gets in the way of understanding other people's.
Oh man, I can see that for sure. Definitely. You know, it's something that I wanted to ask you that's been on my mind a little bit is that all of this travel that you've done and all of the ways you've been able to connect with other humans across the globe. When you look at what's going on in the United States through that lens,
Oh.
how do we come to terms with some of the recent issues with immigration reform in our country? And what's the church is does the church have a position there, or does the church have something to do with some of the challenges that this country is facing right now as it relates to maybe unempathetic uh, approaches to some of the immigration policy that we have?
My first response is, Jeff, are you sure you want to have this conversation? But I've listened.
Well, I only have 20 listeners, so you won't get in trouble. I'm just curious. I think there's an important part for the church in some of the conversation, and I don't know how. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm not connected well enough, but I don't know how deeply committed those are to having their voices heard. I don't know.
Yeah, once again, I think Americans and American Christians too tend to have a very narrow view of the world. One of the delights of serving a congregation in another country for me was to get, I mean, get to know people from all over the world. At the church in Zurich, as an example, there were at least 2 dozen nationalities and language groups on any given Sunday morning. So we shared a common faith and we could all speak English, some better than others, but we came with uh, such different attitudes and perspectives. And I didn't always agree with what I was hearing. I'll give you an example. Global Christians can be very patriarchal in their attitudes toward women. And I bristled at that. My wife bristled at that. But it was an important learning experience that people from around the world see life much differently. I wish American Christians, in particular, could have a much larger view of things. I wish they knew more people from different places. It's I think what we're seeing now in politics and from the evangelical right is a very narrow perspective on things. I would love to do whatever I can to push those barriers back.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that as Christians or others should probably start to recognize is that we use the word travel, and you talk about this. You've coined the term, worthy adventures. But we talk about travel as it relates to the American version of travel, which is leisure travel. It's you get in the car and you go to,
Right.
you go across the country, or you go to Cancun for spring break, or whatever else it is. But travel is our origin story.
Oh,
Humans from the beginning of time have traveled the earth. You talk about your grandmother that migrated from the Netherlands. But from, Abram leaving home and taking that call to Jesus walking from village to village, or Paul crossing borders. I mean, he had to have, he's walked far more than you've walked your couple of Camino trips, but the scripture is filled with humans moving
yes.
around the globe.
Hey, thank you for reading that carefully, Jeff. I'm impressed. Yes, travel is part of the origin story. I think that's where the book begins. People have been setting out and going places for centuries. It's not unusual that people have come to the United States from other places. We've been doing this for thousands of years. And so I tend to have far more uh, I tend to have a great deal more sympathy for that impulse. As you probably read, scientists have identified an adventure gene, right? And they think that one of the reasons that people left Africa, I don't know how many thousands of years ago, but one of the reasons that people left Africa and migrated around the world was that we have this genetic component to push us out, to explore, to discover new things. Yes. And I'm the product of that. As you mentioned, my grandparents are immigrants from the Netherlands, and they slowly and painfully assimilated to American culture. It wasn't. It took a couple of generations for it to happen, but it did finally. Yes, we're people who set out and go places.
Yeah, and I think that's important to recognize is that we have these strong, very detailed borders, but if you go up in a space shuttle, you don't see those. You know, yeah,
Right.
I think they say that from orbit, there's a few things that you can pick out. And one thing that I found interesting is reading a book one time. It was probably from one of the astrophysicists that's relatively easy to understand. Maybe Neil deGrasse Tyson or Carl Sagan. I don't know if you've been in you've ever read any of their work, but they say the way you can tell borders from space is that you can see very, very specifically the difference between the haves and the have-nots. So maybe in the Middle East, you can see the border between Israel and Jordan because one side is green and the other side is not.
Oh.
Um, and I don't know. I thought it was important, and I wanted to bring it up because you remind us so much that as a man of faith, that all of the stories that we've been told and the origin story of humans is you know is movement all around the globe. And I think we're losing sight of that.
And the people you've mentioned, Abraham comes to mind. They lived uneasily where they landed, so they continued to live in tents. They told themselves, "This is not my home. My home is still somewhere else." Again, I think that was true for most of the biblical characters, the ones I can remember. Yeah, there's this sense that we don't really belong here. This is not where we're going to end up, and that's where the book ends. As you know, I think about. The last adventure of our lives, which happens to people as they age. Where do I go from here? What happens to me when I die? Right, and I tried to frame that in the book as the last adventure, last worthy adventure of our lives.
Well, as a pastor, yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question, put you on the spot, but what do you make of this God who so often calls people away rather than telling them to stay put, chill out? It feels like a lot of these stories are God, sending people off into the great unknown, the hero's journey.
I don't know that I've reflected on this a lot, but the first thought that came to mind now was that that's why I love pilgrimage so much, because it's in the journey where we discover who we are. It's in the journey that we encounter other people. I think there's something to be learned, some important lessons to be learned by setting out, and maybe that's what's behind some of these biblical stories. The only way to learn stuff is to leave home and make yourself uncomfortable and make yourself a stranger in a strange land.
A stranger in a strange land. You've been that plenty of times, haven't you? What's next? What's the next adventure? Do you have one planned?
So I've walked a couple of different Camino paths. There's actually a web of them, as you must know. Um, so I'm not going to go back there, but in September, my plan is to go to England and walk the southwest coast path, sometimes called the Salt path. And I'm not going to do the whole thing at 600 miles, but I'm going to walk 9 or 10 days and experience a whole different culture.
That's wonderful. What do you think keeps calling you back to the Camino? Are there these liminal spaces that you encounter along the way, or is it the people, or is it the time and reflection that you get to spend while you're pounding the pavement? or a
Yeah,
little bit of
all of the
all of it?
above, and I think he left out food.
Okay, yeah.
I, I discovered the national dish of Spain is paella. There are some wonderful wines in the northwest corner of the country. But once again, the lasting impression I have are the people I've met. Can I tell you just one story? Uh,
Tell me two or three. I love it.
okay, I met a man named Sebastian. He was born in Chile, and um, he became a Jesuit priest and got a PhD in biblical studies. And his superior told him to go to Siberia and start a seminary there. So I think he was on sabbatical or something to walk, and I walked with him for several days. It's not clear to me he knew exactly what my faith tradition was. He was all caught up in his Jesuit world, but I listened to him talk about his story, and we became, I think we became good friends. Um, that here's the funny part of the story that I'll share with you. I said, when your superior ordered you to go to Siberia, was there a discussion about this, a negotiation? And because as a Presbyterian, there would be plenty of negotiation. And he said, Doug, I took a vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience. So when my superior says go, I go.
That sounds like what I did when my wife and I got married.
Yes. Well, I don't think I had never internalized what that vow meant before, because I don't take it. Well, I don't really take one. I didn't take one similar to that. Uh, so he taught me a great deal in the days we spent walking together.
Well, I think that's another question that I had teed up for you. I was going to ask you in a similar vein. It seems like that person sharing their story or you hearing someone else's story shifted your worldview and somehow made you reflect or heal. And I think that we all experience that along the way. And that's part of what I'm trying to do with the podcast. But I think ultimately, you also spent some time doing ministry work inside prisons. Can you
Uh,
tell us a little bit about that? I mean, the stories that you had to hear there and the perspectives that you had to reflect on there had to been really meaningful for you as you continued on your journey.
right. I was a 21-year-old who'd grown up in a safe, what I now know as a safe, cozy suburb. And I went off to seminary. And because I didn't think I was heading into the church, I took a job as a student chaplain in a maximum security prison in Philadelphia. So I was about as far from home in that maximum security prison as it was possible to get. And for a year on Wednesday afternoons and evenings, I spent my day walking up and down C2 block with young men who had been convicted of crimes involving drugs. I'm not sure why they were all put together, but that's the way it was. And my job was to wander up and down until one of them wanted to talk with me, and I would sit on a bunk, and they would show me pictures of children and girlfriends, and they would tell me their story. And uh, a couple of times, I wrote letters to judges. I thought, hey, there's a story here, and this person's not getting the legal is not getting a fair deal, so I'm going to write a letter to the judge. I don't remember that judges ever wrote me back, but my supervisor said to me, Doug, your job here is, I mean, you can write letters all you want, but your job here is to sit with these young men and listen to their stories and recognize their humanity. I think there were not many people recognizing their humanity, right? They were cut off from their families and friends. And so my job, I guess, was to remind them that they were human beings and that somebody cared about them enough to listen to and listen to them and to look at their photographs.
But gosh, it seems like that's such a foundational part of the Christian faith that maybe people have lost sight of. The stories of Jesus working with the criminals and the less fortunate.
Yes, we have forgotten that, I think. And I'm not sure exactly what to do about that. And that was one of my motivations for leading mission trips. I brought people, church members, to situations where they could encounter extreme poverty and need, and then our job was, sometimes we built wheelchair ramps, but most of the time we listened, and we did what I did in that prison cell block, which was to remind these people that they were human beings and loved and cared for.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Well, so, something I think we lose, and part of why I wanted to do this podcast and bring all kinds of different people on. And again, I can't thank you enough for being here. Is just I feel like in today's world, it's hard being a human being. The way we communicate is different. I heard someone say the other day that it used to be that there were three separate, very segmented parts of our lives. We had our home life, we had our church, and we had our work.
Yeah.
And somewhere along the way, it feels like all three of those have kind of come together. And ultimately, we've lost a lot of connection with other human beings and our ability to be empathetic and compassionate because we don't really engage with people anymore.
Because we spend our lives looking at these things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
All I can say is amen, Jeff. I think the thing I'm most thankful for the life I've been able to live is the relationships that I've had along the way, and the number of stories that I've heard. I wish, you know, it's not really my place to tell their stories, but I think I have another book in me with
Oh,
of
there you
this,
go.
the stories of the people I've met along the way.
I think that would resonate with people a lot. I think that there's something to be said about that. Um, want to ask you this question, and we just talked about how hard it is to be a human these days, and it's got to be hard on you too. I think you said you listened to my podcast in preparation, where I poked a little fun at myself, but I had a hard time turning 50, and I started to look back and thought, gosh, the technological advances that are approaching, I can't even keep up with it. I'm only 50. I mean, you're a few years older than me, but
Yes.
it can become a little bit overwhelming. Would you share with me how have you found moments of peace or stillness during times of, this chaos or complexity in your life?
It is very difficult, Jeff. I don't think I've found the solution. This is a difficult time in our country's life. Um, I, what came to mind as you were asking that question was that I have a millennial age daughter. I actually have two of them, and the older one is very irritated by boomers. Me, in other words, me. Um, and it has to do with technology and but a whole bunch of other things. And so she and I have talked about a podcast too, where there's a conversation between a boomer and a millennial, and we try to our best to understand each other, and maybe we could have guests. But over Christmas, we talked about the need for this. Telling our stories, trying to find common ground. Well, she lives in Minneapolis, so she's been preoccupied for the last month with everything
Oh,
that's
wow.
going
Yeah.
on there. Yeah, we haven't been able to start our podcast, but I, the thinking behind it still resonates with me. I want to hear her. I want to hear all of her complaints, even though they're irritating. And I would like her to listen to me too and hear what it was like to grow up when I did.
Well, your parents gave you the gift of curiosity, and I'm sure you passed that along to them. And I think that's part of it, starting to hear from younger generations, their point of view. It's kind of that whole process of, until this time on earth is done for guys like you and I think we're gonna be committed to consistently trying to learn something new.
Do you think that's generational? I would like to think that it transcends generations, but maybe not. Maybe it's something that's being lost.
I think it's maybe lost, but I think it can be found again, and maybe it comes with age. I don't know. I think there was a certain time in my life when, I told you the story of I had some worthy adventures and some amazing, exciting times when I was in college. And then I went through this huge period of just having my head down, focused on the difficult things that we do, raising families and providing for my family. I had my head down in the day to day, but it just took a little time. It took a little age for me to kind of get out, get my head back up, start looking around and saying, it's time for me I feel like the best version of myself when I'm learning something new, when I'm exploring a new area of the world, or I'm digging into a new book and I need to make time for that. And I think, maybe we don't give up on the next generation. Maybe it's just gonna take them a little time.
I think you're onto something. I think you're absolutely right. That would what 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 you were saying describes my daughter right now. She's got 2 young children, and she's working on her career, and, yes, there isn't a lot of time to be curious about the world out there. So, yeah, if she did receive the gift of curiosity while she was growing up, then at some point she's going to, develop that gift. That's my hope.
I think she will. I think you keep trying on her, keep trying with her. She'll get there. She'll get there. One of the ways that I've kind of found peace that recently is, I just said that I have a choice when it comes to. I noticed that a lot of the chaos and complexity in my brain happens when I'm overstimulated with technology. Here I am doing a podcast, but I think that it's the pings and dings and the emails and the phone messages and all of the things coming at me, and I just made a commitment to say, "Hey, look, I'm in charge. I decide what I pull in. I decide what I push out." And, maybe it started with, do I really need this Apple Watch? Or can I just go back to an old-fashioned analog watch? I just want to know what time it is.
Yep.
Or can I drop this Kindle or whatever, and can I start reading real books again? I just want to touch the paper. And it's been little things like that that have helped me along.
You're a deep thinker. I told you that before we, started recording. I mean, where did that come from in your life, this desire to ask probing questions about things?
I really don't know. It I think that it came with age. I always liked to learn. I always loved school. I wish I could have stayed in school and, wish I had gone back. I think it comes with age, and I think it comes with also stepping back and spending time on ego and humility. And I think the the critical component of remaining curious and wanting to learn is first recognizing that the smartest people in the world are the ones who know they don't know anything. So the minute that you kind of let your ego aside, you express some, deep, real humility,
Yep.
then you become really curious like a child. You want to learn so much. You just realize there's so much more to learn. And I think being able to be open-minded and get different viewpoints from different people. And when you disagree with them, it's not personal. It's not personal at all. I think that's part of it.
So one of the best parts of my retirement years here in Holland is a lifelong learning academy associated with a nearby college, and I go there and take classes of all things. What kind of a nerd does that? But
Yeah,
it
I dig it.
it's so much fun and then there's no pressure to take an exam at the end either. Um, but yes, that's what I've been spending my retirement doing is going to a lifelong learning academy. Y-
Love it. Doug, I could talk to you all day. I feel this connection with you, and I wish we could stay closer, and hopefully we can. And I promise that I didn't want to take up a ton of your time. You talked about digging deep. There's been one question, and it doesn't relate to travel, that I've been really curious about, and I hope you would engage me in some dialogue about this. But when I asked you to be on the show, I was just so very deeply grateful that you would take the time with how busy you are writing books and leading a flock and raising grown children and all of the things you're doing in your life to sit down on a Friday afternoon and spend time with me. But the one thing that's been on the back of my mind that I wanted to ask your opinion on, primarily as it relates to you being a pastor, is that one connection I made early on with you is that within the first couple of pages of your books, You referenced, and we talked about it very early on in the podcast, the comparative mythologist Joseph Campbell. And stumbling on his work a few years back has really been a huge influence to me. And I think one of the things that it helped me to change how I viewed the world, because looking at this, what they call the monomyth, really helped me understand these patterns in myths and stories across multiple different cultures. Parallels, say, between the journeys of the Buddha and Christ. So you're familiar with Joseph Campbell. You're familiar with this concept of the monomyth
Right.
and comparative mythology and what he calls the hero's journey. Is, in your opinion, is there room for Christians to incorporate non-theistic beliefs like Buddhism with faith in Christianity? Can those paths be complementary?
Well, the short answer is yes, and I think you guessed that I would say yes. Actually, it was Thomas Merton who blew my mind in this area. Toward the end of his life, you know the story. He took a trip to Southeast Asia, met with religious leaders there, and he came away. He didn't have time to reflect on this and write a book about it, but he came away clearly affected by the experience. And his conclusion was we have more in common than we have differences.
Yeah.
So yes, we have some theological viewpoints and so on, but we have far more in common than what we have that separates us. And I think I've come to that. Maybe this comes with age too. I've come to that later in my life. That point of view.
When I've learned so much from both Christianity and from my study of Buddhism, and one of the things that I found really healing for me was this Buddhist concept of clinging, and how when we cling to things really hard, and that's why we suffer. And you tell the story in your book about when you turned 60, you had this remembrance of deep betrayal that happened to you earlier in your life.
Yeah.
And somehow you woke up and you were able to release that which no longer served you. And it helped you arrive at peace and maybe grow, just the letting go of it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
You know, I caught on immediately what you were referring to, and it almost made me cry. I was holding on to this feeling of betrayal. I'm angry at the person, or I was angry at the person who did this thing. And I woke up that morning and thought, this is killing me. Holding on to this is killing me. And I don't know how. I mean, I can't give you a point by point method for doing this. I just let it go. I'm going to stop being mad at this person. My life is too short to keep hanging on to it. That's what you're talking about. Yeah, it was a wonderful morning in my life.
Well, I'm glad you shared that with us too, because I think that that's kind of what I was getting at with the question about, is there room for discussion with Christians, or I could be asking this of a pastor from any other type of religious faith, but especially as it relates to Buddhism, there are so many wonderful lessons about suffering and letting go and the impermanence of things and enjoying life in the moment, finding joy or moments of joy in small things, like Annie Dillard talks about in nature. It's good stuff. It's really good stuff, and I hope that others can find, like me, a little bit of room for taking little bits and pieces of what really serve you well, and putting them in your pocket, and you know, traveling along with.
I'm glad you mentioned Annie Dillard. I want to give a shout out to. I want to be more like her as I get older. She never ventured more than about, what was it, 2 miles from home.
Right.
But what what made her so wonderful, what makes her book so wonderful, is that she had her eyes open. She was noticing the world around her. So, whether I fly to some interesting country, I still want to do that. But the truth is, I don't have to go very far to learn important stuff.
Well, I think the quote that I love of hers is, "I came to the creek, got to look at it, but to find out what it said."
Yes.
So for you, like there in Holland, it's kind of the frozen tundra right now. But is there a place or somewhere nearby that speaks to you that way, or has changed the way that you're listening to the world these days?
So I live along Lake Michigan, and every summer, even though we lived in various parts of the world, every summer we came back to this same beach, and we decided this is where we wanted to retire. And I don't walk the beach every single day. In fact, right now it's hard to get down there. There's some snow, but I do walk that beach, and I know it very well by now. But this is where I want to be, and this is where I want to spend whatever time I have left. It's so beautiful to me. This feels like home to me.
Yeah, yeah. But you've come hopefully that, you haven't come completely full circle and you got some more worthy adventures ahead of you, and, sounds like you already came up with another book, so, I'd love to help you out with that if I could ever, do anything to be, helpful to you and pay you back for the time you gave me today. We're almost out of time, I can't believe it. It goes so fast. There's 2 questions that I ask every guest that's on my show, so put you on the spot. So, knowing what you know now, if you could go back and whisper one sentence to your past self, right? And I don't know what age you are. Maybe you're 15 years old, or maybe you're 10, or maybe you're 40. I don't know. But what age would you be, and what do you want to tell that version of yourself?
Well, this is easy in some ways because I came to the insight in therapy at one point. The therapist said to me, and I wish I could say this to my younger self, Doug, aim for excellence, not perfection.
Ooh, yeah.
And when she said it, it seemed like such a profound insight. I think it's not that profound, but it was what I needed to hear at that point in my life. I needed to be less of a perfectionist, and I needed to be aiming for something different.
Mhm.
And I mean, when I finally internalized that, I think I felt free.
So the follow-up question to that is, I started a podcast not because I wanted to have millions and millions of listeners, but I wanted something that was kind of recorded in the history of time, something you kind of look back on. And this will be available to you. I'll send you a copy of it. You can actually go to Apple or Spotify or Amazon and listen to it. But, you know, 10, 12 years from now, you're going to be able to hear this, and what I want to know is, what do you want to tell your future self? You get to do this because you're going to get to listen to this 10 years from now. But Doug, as you look back over all these journeys, both kind of geographical journeys and your spiritual journeys, what do you want to tell your future self to remember about the road that you chose to walk?
Wow, wow, wow. Well, you're good, Jeff. These are all just excellent questions. I, I think I'd like to tell my future self that I didn't need to be nearly so anxious. Even today, getting ready for this podcast, feel a little anxiety. I think that 10 years from now, I'm going to look back and think all that anxiety was totally unproductive.
Yeah.
Relax.
And I bet 10 years from now, your future self's going to want to hear that from it, and it'll be meaningful.
My future self will laugh.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, if your future self laughs, then maybe that's good enough. Maybe that's good enough. Well, thank you again for joining us. I appreciate everything that you've done for me, and I got a lot out of your book. So keep writing them. They help people. I appreciate you. I put you on the spot again. You're a Presbyterian pastor. Would you like to kind of close out our podcast with just a brief moment of prayer or reflection at all?
Sure. And I'll do this the way I often do it in restaurants. I'm not one of those people who bows heads and closes eyes in a restaurant, but I do often say to the person I'm with, I want you to know that I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful for the meal that has been set before us. So this experience today, and my hope or prayer is that this will be important in our lives as we go forward. Great. I'm great
Excellent.
to met you, Jeff.
I'm grateful I've met you too. I hope this isn't the last time we get to chat. But Doug, whatever is coming down your path, whatever future travels you have, um, I want to say peace be with you.
And also with you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.